The following is a production of Professor Robert Barnwell. Each episode includes insights provided by the chairman, CEOs, and CFOs of the world's most successful corporations, as well as thought leaders from premier business schools and international consultancies. If you and your team would like more information on corporate leadership and strategic management, or would like to learn more about Professor Barnwell, his research, and how he may be able to assist your company, please visit Professor Barnwell's website at robertgbarnwell.com.
Hello and welcome to CFO Talk Radio. I'm your host, Robert Barnwell. During the last episode, we spoke with David Parmenter, a leading author, speaker, and consultant based in New Zealand, about his book, Key Performance Indicators, Developing, Implementing, and Using Winning KPIs. This is episode 11, and we'll again be speaking with David in the conclusion of a special two-part program. During this episode, David joins us to discuss his recent book, Winning CFOs, Implementing and Applying Better Practices. David, welcome back to CEO and CFO Talk Radio.
And a welcome to you, Robert, and to all those people listening to this broadcast.
You know, almost universally, the CEOs and CFOs that I've spoken with really genuinely want to see the CFO take a more strategic role. But if I take a look back over the Great Recession of 2007 to 2011, most of the CFOs have reported that they find themselves doing fewer and fewer strategic projects and instead have been focused on running projections and estimates during a period when demand, pricing, commodity costs, even the global economy itself have been just impossible to predict. And many have also complained about the increasing legal and regulatory oversight demands that have taken them away from their traditional role as CFO, as well as, the strategic role that many people want to see the CFO move towards. And I'm really hoping that you'll be able to provide us with some encouragement in terms of being able to make more time for CFOs to take this strategic role.
Indeed. The CFO has to be a leader and business partner. And in order to do this, the CEO has to ensure that the finance team are in the 21st century. So what is the 21st century for a finance team? It's about being very efficient with the collection of data that it's responsible with. It's about having a general ledger that they understand and they can change and manipulate themselves. Certainly not one of these complex beasts that are sold these days where you need a rocket scientist even to change the report format. This is a silly world that we currently have, and Jeremy Hope, one of the great thinkers of our time for corporate accountants, is very critical about the complexity of general ledgers these days. We must have a forecasting and planning tool that we ourselves have put in. We haven't allowed consultants to hold the mouse and design it. We've built it ourselves. So we know, we've been trained by the consultants, we've built a model, and we've based it around the key foundation stones of good 21st century forecasting. So we can quickly reforecast the future without great difficulty. And folks, those people listening, if you're forecasting an Excel, that, in my view, is a career-limiting activity. You've got to have your accounts payable system where every dollar you've possibly got in the finance team for spending on CapEx, the first place you spend it is in AP. So we've now got almost a paperless AP system. Now, many listeners here in America will already be down that journey, so that's great. You've ticked it off. But also, a lot of people haven't even got there. They're in the dark ages. You've got suppliers who are in the 21st century with computers, and a lot of IT, and we've got us who they're supplying, and in between the two is an interchange, which I call Charles Dickens. We're sending paper-based invoices to us, from supplier to us. This is crazy. It should be electronic. If the supplier has processed it once, why can't we take it already processed? All these type of clever methods. We should have a free accounts payable system running where somebody else is running all our minor expenditure items for us, and that they're not charging us a penny. And that exists today. It's called a purchasing card. and great companies in America have been using purchase cards for ages. And yet so many companies see a purchase card as another dreaded credit card, going to create problems. Not if it's handled correctly. So once we've cleaned out all this processing problems, when we get Sarbanes and Oxley requirements to meet, it should be a press of a button stuff. We should have already got that under control. It's only a real problem for us when we are living in chaos. So I say to CFOs, get your house in order, and then when we're in this turmoils, which will come back and in a cyclical basis, we can handle it, and we can still be strategic. Yes, we'll have the old fire to put out, I know that, but we won't be fighting fires all the time, and that's the key thing. There's no point having your fireman suit on all the time, because you just, at the end of the day, it's not comfortable and you don't have enough time to think.
So where should we focus to achieve some early wins during the first 6 months or so of our initiatives to create more effectiveness and efficiency in the corporate accounting and finance function?
The next 6 months is a critical time, and in fact, it is the focus of part 1 in my book. Chapter number 1 talks about accounts payable, and I've gone on about that enough. But chapter number 2 talks about timely month-end reporting. What we've got to have is the ability to report really quickly. We've got to recognize right now that there are companies in the States that have now developed what we call is virtual reporting, where they can give a net profit number to the CEO at any time during the day, during the month. CEO can come into the CFO's office and say, how much money have we made so far this month? And Pat will say to Sam, what time? 1 o'clock? 2 o'clock this afternoon? Give me a time and I'll tell you the number. That's where we're aiming at. So in the initial phase of that change process, we want month-end numbers to be out with the CEO at a minimum of 3 working days. Now that's like the dark ages for a very modern company, but that's a big shift to many companies listening. Then when we get to 3 working days or less, then we start moving down our journey and sorting things out so we can get down to day 1, and then we start jumping into what I call virtual reporting. And that's so important because you do this 12 times a year, so a lot of time is spent in that area, and we're going to free up the senior accountants, corporate accountants, to do a more important future-orientated work. We've got to make sure that our reports, our daily, weekly, and monthly reports, are worth looking at, and we'll spend a lot more time looking at data visualization work of the great master of it. I'm a great fan of the work of Stephen Few, and particularly his book, Information Dashboard Design. We then want to tidy up the way we do board reporting or reporting to the minister or council if we're in the public sector. And that's covered. I cover that in Chapter 4. We've got to get information, more summary information. We've got to get these governance people out of detail and into more summary information so the reports are shorter and easier to prepare. And then we start tackling the annual planning. Now, I know, Robert, it's a big one for you as well. I mean, the annual planning process is one of the greatest mistakes we are currently repeatedly doing once a year. What it guarantees is not annual planning, but annual politicking. What it guarantees is an annual abuse of resource allocation. There is no place in a modern-day society for annual planning as we know it today. The allocation of annual resources based on a fixed performance annual contract. And the guru of this is, again, back to Jeremy Hope, who first coined the phrase beyond budgeting. And Jeremy's work is a must-read, and I'd recommend all CFOs the Beyond Budgeting book and Reinventing the CFO. So what I say, in the next 6 months, you'll never throw out annual planning. It's too big a pill to swallow for the board and senior management. But what you can do is get your annual plan done in 2 weeks. And how you do it is because you break every single rule that's currently been set in concrete. And those rules on how you do it are set out in Chapter 6. So by merging the annual planning process into a very short process, What you've now done is you've started to adopt better processes, and you're starting the change process to go into what I call quarterly rolling planning, which we may get onto later. We then got to start managing the team better. A lot of CFOs, and I do apologize if I'm offending people here, haven't spent much time in the leadership space. I am horrified at the average time or investment in this area. And people have got to understand that to be a great leader, you need to be a Viking with a mother's heart. I'll repeat, a Viking with a mother's heart. This is what was said about Shackleton, one of the greatest serving leaders of all time. And in fact, I cover the Shackleton story even in my accounting book. That's how important it is for leadership. So we've got to manage our troops better. Chapter 7, I talk about the annual reporting process. As we know, nobody reads these annual reports. We've got to do them for legal requirements, and there's a reason for that. But we've got to do them quicker. Great companies are now issuing their annual results within days of the financial year end. All companies, private, public, not-for-profits, all of us have got to say it is not worth spending too much time on our annual accounts. Our month 12 numbers will be our annual numbers. We are not going to make any amendments. We are going to issue them as they are, and we will get the auditors in quicker. We'll not allow them to see any dirty washing on the line. We're just going to march these through and realize as long as our month 12 numbers are a true and fair result of our whole year, then that's fine. You'll never get a perfect number. We'll never get a right number. We can spend 400 adjustments going in a circle. We just got to get out of that silly game. And then I talk about other things such as better client management, marketing the accounting team so we celebrate our successes, so people see the accounting team as a high-performing team in the organization. I always say to accountants, if you climb Mount Everest, if you were the first people to climb Mount Everest, you wouldn't even have celebrated it. You know why? Because the accountants would have looked across in the horizon and seen K2 and said to everybody, hey, we can't celebrate now, we've got to climb that mountain. Clearly, that's not the way to go about life. We've got to learn to understand that celebration is a great form of communication. And I talk about, working smarter, learning all these great tricks about being better at work. I mean, one of the simplest things accountants can do is avoid the most stupidest thing that we do every day, and that is come to work early in the morning and open up our email. That is the craziest thing to do. And I know, the minute you click that email open box, you've lost an hour of your day. And that is not high priority stuff. You've delayed that opening of that box and get on with the project work. Open it at 10:30 after your coffee and then do it. And you'll notice that the sun's still rising, it still sets, the world still goes round. And if there was a critical email, they'll phone you up and say, why haven't you answered it? And then you can explain.
All right, so once we've achieved these goals, what are some of the next longer-term objectives that we should focus? Perhaps those that may require greater investment in time and commitment from the finance team.
Well, we certainly need, Robert, to move into quarterly rolling forecasting. The great benefit of this is that it's a stepping stone to going into quarterly rolling planning. Here I'm talking about forecasting past the year end on a rolling basis, and typically companies are either going 6 quarters ahead, which is the one I recommend, or looking at 2 financial years at a time. So that's a concertina process. Sometimes it can be 24 months, and other times it can be as little as 15 months. And the first quarter of that view is the one that we now manage our business. It's the one we use for reporting purposes. In other words, we've broken through the big barrier and said we will never use the annual plan to create our monthly goals or targets. We will now create them quarterly ahead of time, which reflect the conditions ahead of us. We will resource allocate quarterly in advance. We will not give budget holders an annual entitlement any longer. And once budget holders know that if they fight tooth and nail in an annual planning process, they're not guaranteed that number anyway. They'll only get what they need. Then they'll suddenly realize, well, there's no point fighting tooth and finding tooth and nail for this annual planning money because it's only a notional number. And you go, correct. So I'm just going to not spend too much time on my annual plan. You go, correct. And you go, well, everything's being driven by a quarterly rolling process. You say, correct. And then the penny drops. Very important process. I talk about, this is where now accountants can start moving into having more time to put in a planning tool, to spend more time working with the organization to help the organization find its critical success factors, and to move into the area of what I call winning KPIs, which is a separate broadcast that we've done anyway, Robert, so I won't sort of go into that. And we can then go on to things like looking at our accounting system and stopping ourselves in our tracks and saying, do we need this big monster accounting system that we're thinking we need? Or why can't we build around our existing old plodder and with good systems and just leave it as is? I think far too many times accountants waste money changing accounting systems when that money should have been on the peripheral things that really add value, such as a drill down tool, such as a reporting system, such as a forecasting and planning tool.
Now, in the book, you've also identified several areas in which the CFO can potentially save the company from some really serious and costly mistakes. Would you care to describe some of these?
I'll go through them, Robert, in the order they're in the book for simplicity purposes. Firstly, performance-related pay, a nightmare. Who are the experts on performance-related pay? When you read their work and you look at their careers, you think, what right have you to be an expert on performance-related pay? Half the time, they're failed HR people. Well, HR people are great at many things, but working with numbers is certainly not their strong point. So what on earth are they doing in this field? So performance-related pay is a recipe for disaster in most cases, because as I started to search the internet, nobody's even talked about what the foundation stones are meant to be. For example, one simple foundation stone should be, windfall gains should not be distributed. I mean, if you're in a certain situation in your company and everything's gone crazy, and it's been a fantastic year, I call it a windfall gain, and you should siphon that money off. Yes, people have performed well, but you do not give your windfall gain up because they didn't do anything for it. It was given to them on a plate. That windfall gain is to finance, as we all know, those recession years that you're going to have. And if you're smart like that, you then can actually pay people bonuses even when you've made losses as a company, because you recognize that these people have done incredible things. Market share's gone up, we've made a loss, but we're really well prepared for the upturn. We don't want to lose our staff and they go to another industry which is not suffering so badly. No, we'll give them that little incentive to stay. So there's some very clever things you can do, and so understand what are the foundation stones of performance-related pay, and start being a more active advisor in this area. Avoid rotten takeovers and mergers. The CFO is often involved in a takeover and merger, and we have got to be the voice of caution here. We have got to understand that 1 out of every 6 takeovers and mergers actually produces the numbers that were promised. 5 out of 6 barely break even or lose a fortune. I mean, there's some takeovers in America that have lost the gross domestic product of New Zealand in one takeover. Our annual gross product of the whole country has been lost to the shareholders of one of these companies. It's horrific. And yet these CEOs, blindly go into it. So the CFO has got to be going through and understanding the rationale behind it, and reading Jack Walsh's book on his chapter on it called Winning. I mean, here's a past master at takeovers and mergers. And one of the key things he says, never ever buy a company where the culture is totally different to yourself. If there's a culture difference, it will never work. No matter what deal you strike, never work. Forget it. Very interesting point. Understand it, and then you've got a better chance. Understand also the hidden costs of downsizing. I mean, far too often the CFO is promoting that we've got to do a downsize and this is what we've got to cut. But if you have a feeling that the upside is only 18 months to 2 years away, often the cost of downsizing are greater than, and I'll repeat this, are greater than keeping the existing staff and just simply saying to the staff, think of ways in which you can pay for your salary or contribute to just your direct costs. There must be something we can do as a holding pattern. And great companies do this. They'll fight through these difficult periods. Downsizing and resizing is incredibly costly. We've got to understand these costs. Downsizing may still be the right answer, but make sure you've done the costing first. Reorganizations are rife in companies, and particularly the public sector, where people think saving money by adding two departments together, it's a disaster in most cases. And we as a CFO must understand the ramifications of reorganizations. And if we are doing it, we're doing it for the right reason. A reorganization never solved a problem. It creates a problem. You reorganize only from a position of strength. If you're in a weak position, don't reorganize, solve a problem first. And then with the other things is being really good about how you link. If you're going to float a company, there's various things a CFO has to do and has to be at the forefront of. And I cover that in my chapter. And, of course, a very important area of treasury for those CFOs who have got an active treasury function. So the CFO role is very broad, and CFO must have time to spend in these areas. And it finds this time by taking the finance team out of the day-to-day routines and sharing the strategic load with the CFO's reports. So we now have more time working in the future.
Absolutely agreed. Now, what I'd like to do before we close is return to the subject of the annual budget. And ideally, I'd like to hear your thoughts around the 10-day target and the role of strategy in the budgeting process. And, as you've alluded, I've got some pretty strong feelings about this, and I shared it with Jeremy Hope when Jeremy was one of our first guests. I think he was guest number 2 or 3 for CFO Talk Radio. And as I've shared with Jeremy, outside of working capital and cash management, I've lost much of the very little respect that I've had for the annual budget and the budgeting process. In my experience, the budget has become divorced from the market realities in terms of supply and demand characteristics, economic outlook, and competitor initiatives. And instead, I don't know if I should say for many companies or the majority of companies that I've looked at, I see the budgeting process has really devolved into a negotiation between departments to make changes on a year-over-year basis with very little, if any, external consideration. And then these companies fall into a trap of managing to the budget and competing against the budget rather than competing against competitors and the broader marketplace. One, am I being unfair, do you think? And then 2, how can we get to your goal of the 10-day target and incorporating strategy into the budget process?
Let's answer this in the first stage. It's strategy. Clearly, I'm not critical of strategy. Strategy is vital, and strategic sessions where the board and the senior management team go away, sometimes separately, but I would certainly prefer jointly, away and maybe have a facilitator, external facilitator, help run the process is vital. And companies are doing this sometimes once a year. I would even suggest it's far too important a process, and there should be a revisit more frequently. In fact, one could argue, why don't, as I've seen in some companies, they have a strategic catch-up session once a quarter because the world does change. So strategy is something that needs to be looked at and tweaked on, I believe, on a more frequent basis by the board and by the senior management team. So with that in mind and the strategy set and, visions painted, we need a process which is going to say, well, this is where we want to go, these are the guiding stars, and this is the general direction. How are we going to get there? And this is where we need a planning process to work. And quite clearly, looking at that annually just does not work. You're trying to forecast too infrequently. You're trying to look at something and set resource allocation too far into the future. And we have these annual planning processes that can take 3, 4, 5 months of wasted activity. And as you know, Robert, as soon as ink is dried, that annual plan is now defunct almost. And I'll never forget the time when I finished my beautiful annual plan at BP, and a few months later I walked around the senior management team, and as I asked the question, could I have a look at your green book, which was the annual plan which I'd given them, and I looked on as horror as they pulled it out from their top right-hand drawer, and each plan was in mint condition. In other words, it hadn't opened. And I said to them, well, surely you need this annual plan that I've prepared and that you helped contribute to run the business. And they looked at me and smiled, and I suddenly realized that all that work I'd been involved in was really adding no value whatsoever. Jeremy Hope, in his search, found companies around the world that have never used an annual planning process. And once he discovered it, he realized, and he analyzed their operation, that these companies had this incredible advantage. And he discovered that for a kickoff, thousands of hours weren't spent going nowhere quickly. And senior management and managers around the organization were simply making money. But they were still doing strategy, and they were still putting strategic initiatives in place. They just weren't doing annual planning as we know it today. And they weren't allocating resources on an annual basis. So when he discovered that, and in fact I discovered a company likewise, a roading company, and the CFO, who happened to be a CFO, said to me one day, we've never had an annual plan, never will. And every time a new board member comes in, they always ask me, wait, could I have a look at the annual plan? And he simply says to them, we haven't got one, and if you can tell us when it's going to rain and when it's going to be sunny, so we know when we're going to lay roads down, we'll have an annual plan. But until you can do that for us, we're not having an annual plan. We run our business based on the conditions that face us, and we resource allocate in a different way.
Well, this concludes a 2-episode discussion with David Parmenter, a leading international management consultant, speaker, and writer. Today, we've been speaking to David about his book, Winning CFOs, Implementing and Applying Better Practices, which is available at Amazon.com, Barnes & Nobles, Borders, and at any one of a number of local bookstores near you. David, I really appreciate the time you've taken to be here to discuss KPIs and better CFO and corporate governance practices. If you wouldn't mind, let's have you back again soon. I know the listeners would really benefit from a deeper dive into some of the topics that we've addressed today.
Yes, and I certainly look forward to it, and I look forward to any dialogue from listeners. They simply go to www.davidparmenter.com. They'll find a wealth of information on that website. They can find my white papers, articles, and more information about my books, and a lot of freeware.
Terrific. Thanks again. That was author, speaker, and consultant David Parmenter speaking with us from New Zealand about the thoughts and suggestions contained within his book, Winning CFOs, Implementing and Applying Better Practices. Please join us for our next episode when we bring you more issues and information on how the CFO and senior corporate finance team can work together to drive rapid and lasting performance. Until then, this is Robert Barnwell and CFO Talk Radio wishing you all the best.
We hope that you have enjoyed this episode and found the material of value. To download a transcript of this episode, receive a free subscription to the show, or to learn more about this subject, we encourage you to visit Professor Barnwell's website at robertgbarnwell.com to explore the many executive briefings, presentations, case studies, and other resources available for immediate download. This has been a production of Robert G. Barnwell. All rights reserved.